Hello, I'm Michael Littlecrow, and I'm here to present the section on culture and leadership from chapter 16 of our book, Leadership Case Studies in Education. As you'll see, I believe that culture is the umbrella under which all the other leadership theories can be housed, because each of the 15 previous leadership ways of thinking about leadership come from a particular cultural lens, or possibly multiple perspectives within various cultures. And we're going to see how taking culture into account as we move forward in all we do will provide a more holistic solution to what we're seeking to solve. So educational leaders need cross-cultural awareness. That's what our text says on page 156. But what is culture? Well, our text defines culture as learned beliefs, values, rules, norms, and symbols and traditions are common to a group of people. So notice most of these things that are in culture, that are part of culture, are not visible. They're internal. Some are external, but a lot of times we think when we think of culture, we think of what we can see. Some related terms are multicultural, which is taking more than one culture into account, and also diversity, which is multiple cultures existing within a single group or organization. So I have a question for you. Which me is more cultural? Was it the master student who grew his hair long, wore lots of turquoise jewelry to try to feel more Indian? And it sort of worked. It made me. Or was it the new faculty member who was asked by students to carry in the eagle staff into the powwow, and so put together his first regalia? Or is it the experienced faculty member who now has short hair and is giving a presentation at the Pueblo Grande Museum on cultural uses of mathematics, here demonstrating the use of the hands to do mathematics? Or is it this man that stands before you today? Well, if we judge culture by what we see, we are missing much of the iceberg, which is under the water, under the vision of what we can see. So there's 5 cross-cultural competencies that for leaders. This is from our textbook. What I'm going to do is I'm going to scan over the first 4, because if we go to number 5, if we work on relating to people from other cultures as equals, we see them as equal, they see us as equals. If we can get to that stage, the other 4 will take care of themselves, or possibly in the process of doing it, they will take care of themselves without actually focusing on them. Because as we will learn to relate to other people, we are able to adapt to them. We're able to adapt to living in those communications. We're able to work with them, people of different cultures. We're able to understand and learn from their perspectives. The one thing I do like focusing on, though, is number 2, learning about the tastes of various cultures. That is always something I will put at the top of my list. But relating to each other, once we focus on that and become good at it, we will be well. There are 2 hindrances, though, to gaining these cross-cultural competencies. And the first is ethnocentrism. And this is actually a natural response to life as we are babies and we're surrounded by a particular culture, a group. We make that group, our own group, the center of our universe, of our observations. And again, this is natural, but if we limit our view to that group, what happens is we fall into prejudices. We make judgments of others based upon these fixed attitudes that we have. We are self-oriented, and those will impede us from gaining cross-cultural competencies and being able to work and relate to others. Hofstede has another sort of, I guess, famous or foundational research into culture. Now, the definition that Hofstede used for culture is the collective programming of the mind. Think of that. Culture is a programming of the mind. Yes, it gets us to be able to play nicely with those in our group. We go by their rules, but this programming can make it difficult to play nicely with people outside of our group. So anyway, there's these various 5 characteristics that it looks at, and each one is a duality with one end. There's 2 extremes, and somewhere between those 2 extremes of power distance, which is acceptance that distribution of institutional power is unequal. Some will accept it to a great extent that power should be unequal. Others will say no, power should not be unequal. So there's those 2 ends of the pole, and cultures are somewhere in between. And so they have all of these. What I'm going to do is, there's the reference, and you're welcome to take a look at it. I did look at that article. It was beneficial for me to understand some of these things, but what I want to do is then focus on one particular duality that I'm using in my research to get your input back. Individual leadership traits that are usually across cultures. The desirable traits are trustworthiness, confidence builder, motivational, communicative, these types of things. Regardless of the culture, those are generally seen as desirable. The undesirable attributes listed here are, again, dictatorial. Not too many cultures appreciate that. Now, there are cultures who do, and they are usually egocentric. When a culture becomes egocentric and wants to protect itself from those on the outside, then then a leader who shows this towards those groups becomes popular. But we would like to live in a world where honesty, trustworthiness, encouraging, positive, that these are the types of traits that a leader should have and is respected for having. So now I'm going to turn my attention to the choice book that I have been reading for our 792 class, Designing the New American University by our president, Dr. Michael Crow of ASU. Now, you might notice some similarity but to his name and my name, but we both work at ASU, but I remind my students I'm the little crow. He is definitely the big crow. So these are some of the things he says about culture, tradition, those things go together, and how it relates to universities. So the role of tradition is it serves sort of as a connecting thing. It's sort of like a vital genetic code. Now, genetic code is there in an organism, sort of as a protective thing to make sure that the organisms keep replicating in a healthy way. However, it also is there to prevent changes, which might not always be beneficial in terms of a university. And the dark side of tradition is that it often can lead to Filiopietism, which is ancestor worship, respecting too much the past and then not allowing for change. And why is this a problem? Well, in higher education, what can happen is we become unconscious to how this invasive thinking has gotten into us. The system is just part of who we are. We do things because, well, that's just the way they're done. I don't really know, but that's how I was taught, right? So that's how I teach. So often this happens. And the problem with this is that Filiopietism leads to isomorphism. Iso meaning singular. And what happens is that is a process that constrains ideas and forces all the units to try to look like each other. So we're trying to look like Harvard or Berkeley or Stanford, one of those respectable places. And why? It's because we're uncertain about our own organization. We don't really believe in our legitimacy or successfulness, so we have to look like those who are definitely supposedly the successful legitimate organizations. And then once we've modeled ourselves like them, then we're okay. That's the problem. And so we've got these gold standard research institutions, Harvard, Berkeley, Stanford, those MIT. We assume that our institutions have been optimally structured. We seek knowledge, to seek knowledge with purpose and link useful knowledge with action for the common good. That's what we think is going to be happening. But this Filiopietistic entrenchment in the status quo of academic culture sometimes represents a major impediment to the further evolution of this set of institutions. And we've got change going on all around us. Technology changes, social changes. We have to adapt, and we have to evolve to take advantage of the full information revolution that's been happening and continues to happen. So here's what's the good news is in the design solutions for the new American university, the model that President Crow has set forth. In fact, that was the reason I came to ASU, was this, I read of this model and I'm impressed with it. And this idea of, one of my colleagues says that, who's spoken with Dr. Crow, says that Dr. Crow will often say, what should a university look like? What if we were to blow it up, blow all of education up and start over? What would it look like? Think in those terms. And here's the type of design we should put in, something called invisible colleges, which are informal collaborative engagement of scholars and scientists, oftentimes from around the world. But look at the second one, Communities of Practice by Etienne Winger. Dr. Crow spends several pages detailing out how communities of practice are involved in this design of the new American university. And that really is one of our keystones we've been studying and using in our cohort. The communities, number 3, I'll let you say it, I can't say it anymore, is related. So the first 3 are really communities of practice. And you all, I know from reading your discussion posts, are great experts and implementers of this concept of communities of practice. And 4 deals primarily with industry, bringing them in knowledge-based theories of the firm. So these repositories of knowledge are embedded in the routines and processes that are used. So these are great design solutions for this new American university that we are all a part of. Now time for our case studies. So those were the academic sides of culture and how we can empower ourselves to be involved. I'm going to look at both case studies, and I'm going to pinpoint what I believe to be the primary factor in the difficulties that arose in each case study. So there was one about the empty playground, and again, it wasn't really an empty playground, but half the students couldn't use the beautifully sand on that playground because culturally they took care of their hair with oil, and it would get sand in it, and so they couldn't use it. The thing was the principal couldn't see that because Mary is not concerned about her ability to adapt to the diversity of her new school because she believes all children are alike at heart. Mary suffered from this ethnocentric view of life. She encompassed herself into a circle of certainty that she was the right person for this job. She could do it without having to learn something new herself. A similar problem happened in Welcome to the Heartland. These were international students who were put in the middle of America and expected to adjust to the cultural differences. World Ed is sure that its international students will encounter few if any issues. Again, they encompass themselves within a circle of certainty. They thought they knew everything, so they didn't prepare themselves for possible differences. But what about Little Crow? Well, a while back I was on a grant that had summer workshops, math workshops in Manoa for the University of Hawaii, Native Hawaiian students and teachers. And I came from Oregon, having worked with Native students there, being Native on my mother's side, feeling like Hawaiians are Native, or I would have no problem. I went there with much confidence myself. Fortunately, I had a mentor who, before I did my workshops, included me in some other workshops that she was doing, which entailed elders telling the story of the islands, elders sharing the culture of the islands. And as I listened and reflected, I realized I had fooled myself. I had gotten myself into this circle of certainty, and I needed to back off. I needed to listen. I needed to be open to learning as much as I was there to teach. So things went much better when I took that approach. So where's this circle of certainty comes from? Paulo Freire, Brazilian, they speak Portuguese, Brazilian educator who wrote the book Pedagogy of the Oppressed, which you may be familiar with, had this to say. It says, the radical committed to human liberation does not become the prisoner of a circle of certainty, within which reality is also imprisoned. On the contrary, she enters into reality so that knowing it better, she can better transform it. This person is not afraid to meet the people or enter into dialogue with them. This person does not consider himself the proprietor of history or the liberator of the oppressed, but he or she does commit to fight at their side. See, leadership in this way, not the person in the front, not the person hiding behind the people, but the person right beside the people, fighting together, learning from the people. This is the type of leadership we need. And to take it a step further is let's look at where does the word leader in English come from? What's the etymology of the word leader? The Old English has the meaning of one first or prominent. And look at the High Germanic, it was a title for the head of an authoritarian state. That was from 1918, not that long ago, 100 years, 102, something like that, right? Head of authoritarian state, that's what leader is. So could we look for a different cultural meaning? So I looked to within the language of my grandparents. The word Naganust is the Ojibwe word for leader. Naga means to abandon, forsake, or leave, and Nus means to walk. It was not that the leaders would abandon the people, but that the person who would fulfill the role as a leader would do it because the people needed someone to guide them in walking because of a situation, maybe a war with another tribe, maybe a shortage of food, something. Something would call forth the need for leadership. But as soon as the situation was addressed and solved, it was time for the leader to abandon that role, to become another person in the tribe. And that's how it worked. There were war chiefs, but they were only chiefs at that time. During the other times, they were just people in the tribe. Not just, we say that, but those are the important ones. They were a part of the community. So that's how a leader was visioned in that culture. Related to our work, I think if we look at culture as being related, that relatedness, I was drawn to some of the reviews I was doing in the discussion forums with Chris, dealing with student belonging, how transfer students, maybe I connected a lot. I've transferred a couple times to different universities, and that feeling of that I belonged at the new university, that's so important. Also, Yulina is working on her pop dealing with the culture of reading to empower success in mathematics. And she's been my critical friend and really helping me through some difficult times as I transitioned and have come to realize that my initial idea of what I wanted to do for my dissertation was really too grand. It was beyond what I would be able to do. And so I'm now found in this semester something to look at. And what I'm going to take is the business culture to empower learning in business math. And what I mean is there's a culture behind teaching math and learning math from mathematicians, but it's different than those from the business school really want their people to learn. And this is where it came from. This semester I had a peer review. We're supposed to do it every year. So I contacted someone who I respected within the department. I thought he would see my some of the innovations I was doing, and I was expecting, hey, good job. But this is what I got instead. First, I'm totally shocked at these boxes, and then he had a link to the worksheet I had. I spent a couple hours coming up with this way of doing what's called integration by parts, to try to figure out a sort of a flow chart of how you determine what the parts were, how they would fit together. So I focused on the how of doing the mathematics, so that as they learned the how, they could then understand the why. That's backwards to how math is usually taught. And like he says, this is like 1300s arithmetic, the new traders class into bookkeepers, lowly paid, uneducated. All they could do was follow rules. So, and the tone of the message he sent me was sort of along that line of, I could tell he wasn't too impressed. But then he sent me a link to some of his work that he'd done. He says, what he called it, what I see in this 210, this is my class, it's a math 210, is the worst of mindless symbol manipulation. So what does he mean by that? Well, he sent me off to a little paragraph he had written that was on the internet, and here it is. I won't expect you to read it all, but what I did is you could see the mindless symbol manipulation. But notice that next sentence. I'm going to highlight that a little bit. It is critical to acknowledge that it is precisely this characteristic, MSM, of mathematics, which is responsible in part for its utility and success across so many aspects of modern societies. So my doing something that makes math successful and a utility is wrong? I don't know. I have a different cultural aspect on that. I will teach math in the way that is most successful for the people we're doing. Now, math majors, maybe they need to work, maybe they need to start with the definitions and go there. I'll give that to them. But when I'm going to work with students, I'm going to work for their success. And this is what really inspired me along this. It was a statement from a student on the student evaluations, who said, before taking classes with Professor Littlecrow, I considered myself as one of those non-STEM people, which I guess he's in business, so he still is. But he says, however, he was able to completely change my attitude and open the world of mathematics for me. I didn't realize I wasn't really trying to do that, but at the same time, I'd never stop it. I just want them to be successful in what they're doing. So listening to students, this is what I'm going to do, and this is how I'm going to proceed. So now my pop dealing with the relatedness and the culture of business and teaching business math. This is the two paradigms I'm thinking of, and I've been thinking of for a long time. Indigenous versus industrial. And so I'm calling this right now the Dhamma of the four directions, the teaching of the four directions, these two extremes. And so a couple things I thought is Indigenous people, we belong to the land. Industrial paradigm is the land belongs to us. In the Indigenous paradigm, we have wealth through relations, industrial wealth through possessions. Indigenous paradigm, sustainable solutions, efficiency of time in industrial, lifelong learning for all, or limiting learning by admission standards. Learn by doing, learn by instruction. All are equal and related in a hierarchical class structure that puts people above each other, and even in our learning, the grading structure to stratify people. But is there a middle path somewhere between these two that is not just necessarily in the middle, something like wealth through relations and possessions? Could we have a way of looking at possessions and relations that we're empowered to do both? Everybody has enough, they have enough possessions to have what they need, and everybody is working to be related to each other. So these are some of the things I'm thinking of doing from a cultural perspective. But I have one more question for you all, and it is, what kind of demon is good? Of course, it is an ASU Sun Devil. So forks up, masks up too, especially at this time. I thank each of you for allowing me to be part of this cohort in making me feel like I belong, and for all your insights in the past 15 chapters on leadership, as well as all the discussion forums. So I'm very happy to be moving forward with you all, and looking forward to getting through this summer and into the fall. Thanks.